Hi, James Rieger, co-chair of Tannenbaum Halpern's Cannabis Industry Practice Group, here with our second Video Minute series entitled Cannabis Insider. Today we're going to be talking about banking in cannabis. Why is banking important, you ask? The reason is that about 7 years ago, the FinCEN Bureau of the Treasury Department enacted a bunch of rules and regulations around strict due diligence requirements for banks that have anything to do with cannabis businesses. So if they take a deposit, if they maintain a checking account, if they process any kind of payments or payroll, they would have rigorous due diligence requirements, and they would have to file things called suspicious activity reports. And they're very onerous on the banks. So every time a payment came into a cannabis banking client's account, there would be a suspicious activity report. That cannabis banking client sends out payroll, there'd be another suspicious activity report. So you can think of it, there might be a course of hundreds of them for one particular cannabis client over the course of a year. It's essentially driven out any substantial banks from banking cannabis. There are about 700 banks that do file suspicious activity reports, but the thought is that it's really probably only a couple hundred, and they're much smaller local regional banks, credit unions, that are actually very active in the business. So it's a huge impediment to doing business. It keeps some people keeping a lot of cash on hand, paying employees in cash. It generally results in a fairly unsafe environment for the employees and for the cannabis businesses. And also, of course, we need to have credit cards for the industry to really succeed and flourish. 2 years ago, during the Trump administration, the House, in a bipartisan piece of legislation, actually passed something called the Safe Banking Act, which was meant to be a safe harbor for banks that would allow them to bank the industry more readily. And it would state that banks would not be subject to regulatory action solely because they were engaging in banking transactions with cannabis businesses. It would not dispense with the suspicious activity reports, and it would also not encompass traditional Wall Street capital markets activity like underwritings. But it would allow banks to offer credit cards, which would be very, very important for the industry. It would allow insurance products, armored car services, and would generally de-risk having participation in the cannabis industry for a number of banks. And the thoughts would be that larger banks would start to become involved, and it would become easier and cheaper for cannabis businesses to bank. Today, cannabis businesses actually go out of pocket and pay their banks or their credit unions they find, $1,500 a month or something, instead of the small amount of interest that the rest of us get on our checking and savings accounts. What's interesting today is that in the last 2 weeks, the House of Representatives, U.S. House of Representatives, have amended the Defense Appropriations Act of 2021, which is necessary and vital for the country's self-interest, to include the Safe Banking Act once again. So it's sort of a backdoor way to take a popular bipartisan issue such as appropriating funds for the Department of Defense and paying sailors and soldiers and buying guns and bullets and things like that, to include the Safe Banking Act. The thought is the Senate will probably not pursue that in that fashion, and that perhaps that bill will have to be split off from the Defense Appropriations Act. But it would be very interesting over the next few weeks and few months to see what happens with the Safe Banking Act. Progressives in the Senate, such as Cory Booker and Senator Schumer, are saying that they really don't want a standalone piece of cannabis legislation. They would prefer a much more far-ranging and diverse bill that would include expungement, would liberalize all the cannabis rules around the country, and remove cannabis from Schedule I as a controlled substance. So it would be obviously an enormous step in the right direction to pass the Safe Banking Act, and it'll be quite interesting to see what happens in the next few months. Thank you very much. James Rieger, Tannenbaum Halpern. Please visit our website for more information, THSH.com.